In the past I played and I enjoyed the classic Avalon Hill solitaire game B-29 Queen of the Skies, where the player leads a crew of a B-29 in a series of bombing missions over Europe in World War II. So I knew it was only a matter of time before I would try B-29 Superfortress, which is a sequel remake of B-17. It is published by Khyber Pass Games, and it takes a couple of concepts from B-17 and moves them to the Pacific Theater of Operation, where the player will guide a crew of a B-29 in a series of bombing missions against Japan. So this is the premise. Let's see how the game plays. The game is played on two displays. One is the Crewmember Chart, where you will place counters representing the members of your crew so that you know where everybody is. This is important especially if you have to start moving your crew members around to perform actions. Also, you will place markers on those counters to represent a change in status for your crew members. For example, in case a crew member is wounded or frostbitten, then you have other counters representing the fire extinguishers. So you have this display here that tells you everything that is happening inside your B-29. And then you have this other display here, this pretty beautiful display that has several areas of importance. Here you have a series of boxes that will represent your position in the mission. All missions start from here. Then you will move this marker here to indicate your movement against your target. This box here represents Iwo Jima, and it may be one of your targets, but most of your targets are going to be against Japan, represented by these other boxes here. And against you have a counter that will indicate what your target is. So you need to reach that box, bomb that box, and then fly back to your base in order to complete your mission. And then you have other areas on the map that will help you keep track of other things. For example, the weather, altitude, cabin pressure, navigation modifiers that you keep track of using these two tracks. And then you will use the final modifier when you're rolling on the navigation table. Then you have these other boxes here where you will place the enemy fighters to indicate the angle from which you're being attacked, and each angle has 3 different levels because the enemy may be attacking you from high, from level, or from low. And you also have a box where you can place your escort in case you're assigned one for the mission you're flying. You have a rulebook, of course, 22 pages, and this rulebook is written very well. I think it is very well organized. I didn't have any particular problems with it. Also, it has a lot, and I mean a lot, of historical notes. And this is very important because the game has a very high value as a simulation. So it is really important to understand all the historical background behind the game. It really lets you understand why certain choices were made. It gets in the mood for playing the game. They're really great. But again, overall the rulebook is pretty good. It's very functional. And then, my friends, 40 pages of charts and tables. So yeah, 40 pages of tables and of text explaining the results that you roll on the table, so explaining the modifiers that you need to use. You don't like to read, you don't like to roll on tables, definitely not the game for you. Otherwise, these tables are organized very well. They allow you to go through all the procedures of the game without any particular problem or without feeling too burdensome. A mission will start with you rolling on several tables to determine the target for that mission, to determine your position in the squadron, anticipated enemy resistance. I don't have time to cover all these tables, of course. This will give you modifiers that will impact your chances of encountering enemies. Optional takeoff. It seems that historically taking off wasn't something to be taken for granted by B-29 crews. A lot of things could go on during takeoff. Weather is an extremely important table. You will roll for weather in each new area that you are entering. It may have good weather, poor weather, or bad weather. You have a table for impact of bad weather, bad stuff happening. Then you have 5 tables that you use if you decide to use navigation rules. If you decide to use navigation, then you have to check for pilot age, that reckoning, celestial navigation, radio navigation. These 4 tables will give you modifiers. Then you total those modifiers and you take them into account when you're rolling here on this table that tells you where, if you are on off course or on course. And if you are off course too often, then it costs extra fuel for you to go back on course. So these tables don't really make the game more complicated. They make it longer, they make it more realistic, but actually they also make it harder because they add one more way in which you may spend extra fuel, and that means in which you can get yourself in trouble. At some point during your mission, you will join your formation. You do not have to fly in formation for the entire mission. You roll on this table to see how the formation assembly works. Then if you've been assigned a fighter escort, then you have to roll to see if you're able to rendezvous with the fighter on time. Then when you are on or around your target, you have to check if you are encountering enemy fighters. If you are, then you roll to determine the type of fighter that is attacking you. Usually it's only one fighter attacking you. There wasn't much combat in the skies of the Pacific, especially when compared to what was going on in the Western Theater Operation in World War II. If you do have an enemy attacking you, then you have to determine the area from which the enemy is attacking you, the angle, low, level, or high, if the pilot is green, average, or ace. Then, after you determine that, you will know what are the guns that you can use to fire against that enemy, and then you will execute defensive fire, and you will also cross off the ammo that you have used. In case you were able to hit the enemy, you will see the type of damage that you gave to that enemy. And if the enemy is still there, then it is the enemy's time to attack you, to see, depending on the type of attack that the enemy fighter is launching, whether or not the enemy is dealing a hit. If the enemy hits the B-29, then you have to see the number of shells that hit the B-29. Then at that point you will roll to see the exact part of the B-29 that has been hit, again depending on the angle. You have a hit effect multiplier that will make the damage from a fighter more severe depending on the caliber of the gun that the fighter is using. There may be successive attacks, different other things. Then if you have been hit at that point, you go to the damage section, which is not right after combat. I think it would have been good to have it right after combat, but it's not too far in the rulebook, in the chart book. So if you have been hit, once you know exactly the area that received the hit, then you go on the specific tables. There's a table for nose, a table for navigation radio, forward bomb bay. Just there are so many areas, so many tables, and the results are usually devastating. I mean, being hit is a big thing. You do not have nice things like, oh, I just lost a point of energy, I still have 9. Being hit once may be enough to destroy your aircraft in some cases, which is the way it should be, because it is the way that unfortunately it can happen in real wars. Suppose, however, that you survive all the attacks, then you finally are over the target. Then you have to check for the target visibility. That will impact several things going on as you're executing the actual bombing. They may be attacking you with flak, and you have to survive that too. Different tables to determine that. Then finally you have to roll to see if you are off target or on target. Depending on that, you'll be able to see the level of accuracy of your bombing, and this will tell you what percentage of your bombs actually did reach the target. Other things that may happen to you, but suppose that everything goes well, then after the bombing you will spend some extra fuel to turn around in the same area that you've bombed, and then you start the second leg of your trip, which is, well, going home. In the areas in which around the target you still get attacked by enemy fighters. Well, you may get attacked, you still have to roll for that. Then you go back in open sea and you just roll for the usual things, weather, navigation, if you decided to add navigation, and then you finally, once you finally may be able to reach your destination, which is your base. And at that point, when you reach your base, well, things are may still be troubling, depending, of course, on what happened before, what happened during your mission, because you had to offer landing. It's not automatic, and again, you have a long list of modifiers, and look at this. They're all negative and some pretty bad. If pilot or co-pilot are dead or seriously wounded and another crew member is attempting to land the plane, well, it makes sense that it would be pretty hard to land the plane successfully. But basically here you just go back and see all the damage that you got, you apply all those modifiers to this table, and you will see if the crew is killed in action and the B-29 wrecked, or if everything goes well and all's well that ends well. Clearly the designers went for historicity and they tried to be as accurate as possible. And this decision, very conscious clearly, is not without consequences on the way in which the game plays. For example, this is a war game in which you have almost no combat. For most of the game, you will just be flying without any enemies around. All of a sudden, from time to time, there will be a lonely Japanese fighter attacking you. You fire at them, they fire at you. Nothing happens. Most of combat is completely ineffective. And then the Japanese fighter disappears in the blue sky, which is what happened historically. Japanese fighters tended to attack alone, to attack only once, and not to attack very often. Again, also like only 0.25% of all B-29s sent against Japan were lost to Japanese fighters, and the game is historical, so takes that into account. So really the danger that comes from the Japanese fighters, even though you think, that's going to be the exciting thing, is really not what this game is about. Your enemies are going to be malfunctions and lack of fuel, and these two things actually can create some very nerve-wracking moments. It can still create tension when you're wondering, am I going to have enough fuel to make it home? It is still interesting, but the problem is that you have to adjust to a different type of experience. Also, the game is extremely luck-based. You roll and you don't have much power on what you roll. It is also a war game where the player does not have many options. The player cannot make many decisions. There are minor ones here and there, but most of the times you roll on the tables, see what happens, and you go along with the story. Again, is it something you would expect from a war game? Probably not. So many players are going to be disappointed by this. In the end, this doesn't feel much like a war game at all. It feels like a war simulation. It is, as a simulation, it is something that can be extremely rewarding. The level of detail is staggering. The ability of this game / simulation to evoke the facts, the events narrated is really amazing. You have this experience of traveling through time, really. You're not an actor in this, you're not a director of the story, you are an actor. You're this invisible ghost that is inside this airplane. Okay, I'm back to my conclusions after my daughter woke up, and probably you heard her in the background, and after I won the Titanic struggled to make her fall back asleep. So as I was saying, the player in this game is a sort of ghost that is seeing and hearing things from a very advantage point of view, but he cannot do much to alter the course of the events. So this game really is a simulation that, as a simulation, is extremely interesting. It is rich, it is deep, it just feels so accurate, everything feels right. The sense of realism is pretty remarkable, but definitely it is not a game that feels very hands-on. So if you want to learn more about B-29s, I think this is really an excellent way to learn about them. I can't believe it. Otherwise, if you're looking for a game that is really hands-on, this is not one for you.